He's glad to be here tonight because all of them are in Benton, okay? and he's got some quiet time on the way home tonight. But y'all be in prayer for him. But you are a lawyer. Okay, is that okay, guys? There's a lawyer present. Do you get that all the time, don't you? It's like being a dentist, isn't it? Yeah. But he is a lawyer and a lover of Jesus. And, you know, that is great. We need folks like him in that profession, out there serving and being one who's representative of the ultimate judge, him being there and also being part of our Arkansas Baptist State Convention, being able to assist us and help us. And we are going to have a question and answer time more towards the end. But he wants to share what the foundation does and how that they can help you. And I just want to tell you guys how much I appreciate you coming out tonight. I always worry when we do something that's kind of unusual, but y'all are so supportive. And just praise the Lord for y'all being here, okay? And I want to ask Mark Yardley, my brother, would you pray for us and open us up tonight? And Dylan, the show's yours, brother. Appreciate you.
Amen. I'm assuming this is working. You guys can hear me. I tend to mumble and talk fast, so raise your hand and tell me to slow down if I get in a bad situation. So, like you said, my name's Dylan McClain, and I am the vice president and attorney for the Arkansas Baptist Foundation. And I do get that quite a bit. And those that I heard a few comments. I am a licensed attorney. And I'm old enough to practice in the state of Arkansas, and I have my ID, but my diploma is on my wall at my office, so I'll send you a picture if you want proof. And this year, August, will be my 11th year that I've been at the foundation, believe it or not. And like you said, I have 3 children, 10, 8, and 6, 3 girls. And like Brother Walker said, I'm glad to be here tonight. They're off tomorrow for the eclipse. I have to go into work because they're slave drivers at the foundation. But I guess I'll go outside and look at the eclipse for a little bit. I am glad to be here with you guys tonight to talk about what the foundation does and just some general practical things about estate planning and things that we have to think about. I said it earlier to somebody I was speaking with. Unfortunately, this is something we're all going to have to deal with. And we're going to have to deal with it with our family members. We're going to have to deal with it for ourselves. And also, unfortunately, those that don't plan give people like me a job, and we make a lot of money off of it. So we're going to try to talk about some things tonight that will hopefully lessen the burden when it comes to our estate, and hopefully lower the cost too for family members and all that. Okay, so yeah, so I'll go through the first part. I call it ABF 101. So Arkansas, when I say ABF or the foundation, I'm talking about where I work. And so this is just kind of an overview because a lot of people don't realize the convention and how it's organized, and then where your cooperative program dollars are going. So we can go to the next slide. I think is an image of the convention. So this is kind of a organizational chart of the convention. Think of that as like the parent company for Arkansas Baptist ministries and churches and all that. And so we have the agencies and institutions that are part of the convention, which some of those you're probably familiar with: Arkansas Baptist Children's Home, and Family Ministries, and then there's Camp Siloam, and then Ouachita Baptist University and Williams Baptist University, and then some of the various teams and ministries that fall under the convention and the executive board. But the unfortunate thing about all of or at least at the foundation, all the other ones, we kind of know what they are, right? It's this Ouachita Baptist University. That's a university, right? Or the Children's Home. Well, obviously they take care of children and minors that are in need, and a lot of other family ministries. And then there's Camp Siloam. And so it's a camp, right? So all those, but when you say Arkansas Baptist Foundation, most people go, I don't know what that is. I don't know what they do. And I've been at, like I said, I've been at the foundation 10 years, and there are still people who I walk by in the hallways every day in the convention building. They have no idea what we do or what I do. They just know they're the money guys. And so they come and see us when there's problems. And because there's an attorney on staff, they come to me when there's some big problems. So I try to answer those the best I can, but then quickly refer those out to licensed attorneys that practice in whatever area that they're dealing with. But anyway, yeah, that is kind of the organizational structure. But the foundation, the way I explain it is we are kind of like the trust department for the Southern Baptist world. I don't like that definition, but I'm trying to give you a frame of reference. And we handle all the endowments and scholarships and basically non-cash gifts for Baptist ministry. So I have a lot of examples over the last decade, but someone wants to give a plane away. Well, most churches don't know how to handle that, and so we step in and do that. Or somebody wants to give a piece of real estate or stock or things like that. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but we handle complex tax and legal and governance issues for Baptist ministries and churches in our state. It's kind of a summary of it. We can go on to the next slide. So today I'm going to be talking about estate planning basics, and I think there's a slide that talks about our different services, maybe the next one, yeah. So I'll be talking about the estate planning basics here in a second, but the way I break down the foundation services, we have services for ministries, and then we have services for individuals. So for ministries, you can kind of see there a lot of nonsensical words that don't really mean probably a whole lot. But for institutional consulting and guidance, so a lot of times we will step in and help people get through a transition. So like if Camp Siloam is, maybe their leadership is going through a transition, then we have people who can step in and kind of help out with those sort of things. Or our president and CEO serves and advises the endowment committees and things like that for Ouachita Baptist University, and we help out with their investments. And so there's a lot of those sort of things going on, and we have staff that are dedicated to those various things. But then gift investment oversight, administration and oversight, that would be, so you guys set up a scholarship endowment or a building fund, or you're trying to save up for that, that rainy day fund, or going through a capital campaign to raise funds to build a gym or something, then we can help out with that. And invest the funds for you. And of course, we don't charge anything for that. We just like the cooperative program, we aggregate everybody's funds together and try to get everybody the best deal. And so because we've aggregated all the funds of all those institutions and the 1,500 to 1,600 churches that we have in the state, there's a lot of money in that pile, and so it's one of the few times that we can, as a Baptist church, kind of tell the big banks what to do, and we can say, well, we don't like that rate. Okay, we're going to take our money and move it over here, and then magically we get a better rate, just because of the amount of funds that we've aggregated from the other institutions. And I meant to say this earlier. So we had a few guests and people from the church. He said there's going to be no worship. Anybody that showed up for a worship or a sermon, you're going to be sorely disappointed. And anybody who's live streaming and was, getting online to hear a sermon, I apologize, but I promise we're gonna get in some good stuff. I just remember that I have a lot of stories too, so forgive me. I did have a church one time. They called me and said, "Hey, can you come on Sunday morning?" And I said, "Sure." And because of the time of it and the way he presented it, I thought I was just presenting to the Sunday school hour. But no, he gave me the church hour. And so I showed up, and there's a church full of people, and they were expecting a sermon. And here I am going off about estate planning and taxes and all this other stuff. And it was probably the worst Sunday those people had ever experienced. And so I'll try to liven up and have a few bad jokes. But there's going to be no sermon And I'll try not to preach too much or get on my soapbox about certain stewardship issues. But okay, let's quit tracing that rabbit. Okay, so let's move on to services for individuals. So this is primarily what I'm going to be talking about, and primarily where I live. But the foundation provides free estate planning to anyone in denominational service or employed in denominational service. So that would be Brother Dale, if he wanted to create an estate plan, we do that free of charge. Trust, wills, power of attorneys, deed work, all that kind of stuff. Or anyone that works in the family is employed by one of the agencies, institutions, or churches. So that keeps me busy. As I said, we have 15 to 1,600 churches, all the staff of those churches, all the staff of the agencies. So there's a lot of estate plans that come in that I have to complete for those that are employed in the family. But then we also provide free drafts to lay people, such as many of you in here who are leaving at least 10% to their church or someone in the family. So if you wanted to leave 10% of your estate to the church, then we can provide free drafts for you. We generally recommend getting outside legal counsel because there is a conflict of interest there since I'm employed by the foundation, but we can at least cut down on some of the costs for you. And if you need somebody, we can, obviously refer you guys, or you may have somebody in the church who's a licensed attorney that you would want to use. But anyway, we can provide free drafts there. And then we also serve as executor and trustee and power of attorney for what we call charitable estates, which is really 50% or more is going to one of those entities. And so that keeps me busy because I oversee all the estates that we're administering. And so as you can imagine, and with that, all those churches, all those accounts, all those things, there's a lot of transactional stuff that goes on that I get involved with, and that keeps me pretty busy. Okay, so let's move on to what you guys probably came here for, or at least, or the ones that are surprised that we're talking about this, what I'm going to be talking about for the rest of the time. Okay, so first we're going to talk about how property transfers, because just like when I went to that church and I was getting a lot of blank stares, early on when I would give my presentation, I would go in, I would citing the law and talking about taxes and all these kind of complex issues, and I would get a lot of blank stares. And so I think this helps a little bit before we get into some of the other things. So we can go on to the next slide. So these are the 4 legal ways that how property transfers. There are a lot of illegal ways, but I'm not going to advise you on any of those tonight. So we're going to be talking about the legal ways, and first is by intestacy. And all that is the fancy word that means you don't have a plan in place. I would bet, because it holds pretty true, that more than 50% of the population, in the United States at least, has no estate plan in place. And from what I've seen, of the 50% that do have it, something's probably wrong, and it's not going to turn out the way they wanted to, for one reason or another. So, intestacy is you don't have a plan, but luckily for you, the state of Arkansas has written one for you, and it's in our statutes. I don't recommend that. I'll talk a little bit more about that later when I get into probate. But Arkansas, our legislature has written several laws that say, okay, this is what to do when you don't have a plan, and it kind of goes down your next of kin and all that to make the distributions and get someone appointed. Okay, so that's intestacy. Number 2 is you have a document in place either by a last will and testament or a trust, or a combination of those two. But basically, you have a plan in place, and I'll talk more about the differences there and how those both work as well. The third way is by contract, and many of you may have these on some of your accounts and don't realize what it is, but that's what it is a contract, but basically payable on death contracts with the bank or with your life insurance or retirement account, in which you've named a beneficiary that says, upon my death, this is who I want to receive this asset. And so that's a contract between you and the institution, the financial institution that holds that asset. And that's one of the primary ways a lot of people pass things, and those are fine. It's not my favorite, but they work, and it's free, so that's why most people use it. So you just can do that at any bank or wherever you have an account. You can set up a payable on death contract to make that pass to your kids or whoever you want to benefit from it. You can even name the church. And the last way is by deed. And so by deed, that's really only refers to real estate. So when you went through closing on whatever real property you purchased, and you signed your life away and signed about 100 documents, one of those was a deed, and it said that the property was coming to you, and now you're the owner as the grantee. And the great thing about Arkansas is we also have what is called a beneficiary deed. And so you can file a beneficiary deed, and it says, okay, upon my death, I want my real estate to transfer to this person. And as long as it's legally executed and filed, upon your passing, it automatically transfers your real estate to those beneficiaries. And it's a great way. There's a few things. I always say you got to do a combination of these things. Don't rely on number one. I'll go ahead and hit all that. Don't rely on number one. Arkansas law is strange in some aspects, because if you leave something in your individual name and have to go through probate, everything goes to your kids first, not your spouse. So now the surviving spouse has a claim against your estate or that asset, but basically what it comes down to is they call it a 1/3 life estate. So you own it and have a life estate in it subject to your kids. Now that you probably say, well, that's perfectly fine. I love my kids and I love them equally, right? But
not really.
yeah, so we have to say that. The issue comes up in second marriages, and that happens quite a bit. And some of you may be second marriage, maybe your spouse predeceased or for whatever reason, and you got a his, mine, and ours situation going on. Well, maybe you don't want it going to your kids, or maybe you didn't intend for that asset to go to kids. You want it to go to the surviving spouse, or maybe your new kids don't get along with your kids, and it's not going to end well. And that's where it becomes an issue. So all that to say, don't rely on number one. And the surviving spouse, maybe you don't have any kids, and you're like, that's fine, it's going to go to my spouse. Well, if you've been married less than 3 years, then the spouse can only get 50%. So there's a lot of little weird rules that can pop up if you rely on number one. But we're not going to do that after tonight. You're all going to run out and get an estate plan. And we're going to do a combination of 2 through 4. We're going to get a plan, and at a minimum, we're going to do 3 and 4. So we're going to go to the bank, we're going to go to our life insurance agent, retirement accounts, and we're going to make sure everything's at least payable on death, because you don't have to talk to somebody like me to do that. You can go to wherever the local branch and say, I want to make my bank account, my savings account, my CDs, I want to make all of them payable on death to my kids. And they will help you do that. And at a minimum, you're going to do that. And then the only thing you need somebody like me for is number 4, which is you're also going to draw up a beneficiary deed that says, upon my death, it automatically passes to my kids, or wherever you want that to go. So at least if you do 3 and 4, you can get the maximum amount passing automatically outside of probate. And I'll talk more about what that means in a second. Okay. Also, Todell, I actually like questions, and we're going to have questions at the end, but if I say something and you want clarification, or you have a burning question you need to know now, I'm more than happy to answer it while I'm going. I prefer that rather than me just journal on and on about all this. So feel free to ask questions. Okay, so what is estate planning? A lot of people have all these kind of preconceived notions about estate planning and what that involves. You know, they've seen the late night infomercials and they're scared to death of what's going to happen because of those, or maybe you've heard the radio commercials, or you know, you have that one family member that they know everything about estate planning, right? And there are horror stories out there. And even when people have gone through it, I find that what they're saying is there's a little bit of truth to it, and then there's a lot of, let's say, non-truth to it, or alternate facts, I think is how the news coins it. And so I'm going to try to debunk some of those. But basically, what estate planning is, you can see my simple definition. It's basically the process of determining who's going to get what, when they're going to get it, and how much, and why. That's talking about your assets. It's also a time for us to plan for our incapacity. So that's when we can no longer legally make decisions for ourselves, and there's a legal definition that goes along with that. And I guess I'll go ahead and talk about that a little bit. So with incapacity, it's when you're not supposed to be able to transact for yourself anymore because you have some kind of incapacity. It's usually, think of somebody who has dementia or Alzheimer's, or for whatever reason they can't make decisions for themselves. The problem with that is we have case law in Arkansas that says sanity is not required. It only takes a lucid moment. I don't know what that means. And I don't want to, and the problem is it usually would have to prove it in court. And the other problem is my best witness is usually dead or incapacitated. So I can't prove those things. So all that to say, let's not wait until we're incapacitated. And there's some documents we're going to put in place before that happens, and I'll talk about that. But here's a little bit, and I'll try not to preach too much. At the foundation, we think this is our last opportunity for stewardship and creating a legacy, not about money, not about how much we leave to our kids and our grandkids who we love more than our kids, but it's an opportunity for us to leave a lasting legacy of how we're supposed to steward assets as Christians. Because a lot of times, especially I'm in that stage of life, like I talked about 10, 8, and 6, I've seen people put more planning into a Disney vacation than they do to their estate plan and what they've accumulated over a lifetime. And so I think as Christians, and we all know this, I don't want to sound cliche, but the Bible talks more about money and how we handle money than it does about heaven and hell. There's more verses that refer to that. And so I think it's an important topic because I think it can have a hold on us, and we want to be good stewards. We don't want to be misers and kind of find our strength and find our identity or security in these things. But we also want to leave a good legacy for our kids and make sure things are going to be handled well, and that the people that are receiving it, are going to be good stewards as well. Okay, so the next, this slide's, we're going to get into wills versus trusts and some of that. So will is basically just a document that you execute during your lifetime that expresses your final wishes of who you want to administer your estate, who you want to distribute things to, and then it's also where you can name who you want to be a guardian for any minors that you may be in charge of. And so next slide is wills basics. These are particular to Arkansas. They're pretty uniform across most states. But these I know are good in Arkansas. If you're from Louisiana or a resident there or going to be a resident, I'm sorry, I know nothing of the Napoleonic Law, and I don't want to try to interpret it all because it doesn't make sense to me every time I've ever looked at it. But this is Arkansas. If you execute a will here, they'll accept it down there. Just don't ask me to try to interpret the one from Louisiana. Okay, so here are some of the basics. You have to be 18 years of age or older, and you have to be of sound mind. And we already talked about it a little bit. I'm looking around the room. Most everybody, I think, is 18, from what I can tell. There may be like a few that are not. And the sound mind part, everybody seemed pretty with it when I talked with you. But you may have been having a good moment. Maybe you were having a lucid moment when we were talking. Again, don't make your family members or somebody like me have to prove this in court. I know we're all going to live forever, and we're not going to have to worry about that, and we're going to be, of sound mind until we're 120. But in my experience, that's not the case, unfortunately. So again, everybody's you're 18, so it's time to execute a plan, and you're in between that moment of maybe not being of sound mind. So let's not rely on that, and go ahead and get a plan in place. Okay. It also has to be 100% in writing. So typically it's typed. You can handwrite your own will. That's called a holographic will, but I don't recommend it because although you may be plainly saying things in your own writing, unfortunately, as you guys may know, attorneys will argue over the word "the," and a lot of times, whenever I've seen a holographic will, I have a lot of questions. And the language we attorneys use, we brought it over with us from England whenever we formed as a country, and we never changed anything, and that's why it doesn't make sense for most people when they read it. And I have an example of this. My great-grandmother, she was 99, and she passed away last summer, but she wrote her own will, despite the fact that she has a great-grandson who's an estate planning attorney. And I'm not bitter about it at all. But my grandmother, her oldest daughter, this is my grandma, Nana, said, "Dylan, will you read Granny's will and tell me what you think?" And I read it, and I said, "Well, I know what Granny was trying to say, and it's probably going to be just fine. But here's where it could have gotten. It didn't. It turned out fine, but it could have not turned out fine because Granny had 6 kids." All my great aunts and uncles are still living. But with 6 kids, at least 2 of them are going to be crazy, right? I mean, it's just statistics. And I'm not going to say which aunt or uncle I think is crazy or could be crazy. But I said, if aunt or uncle so-and-so wants to challenge this, I think they could. And I said, hopefully they don't, and they'll honor Granny's wishes and not cause us stink. But luckily, like I said, everything turned out fine. But I've seen in families where it doesn't. Like I said, when you have those second marriages and there's his, mine, and our situations, or maybe kids who are estranged from each other and don't like each other anymore, or maybe Granny liked one kid more than the other and left more to that one. I mean, so there's situations that can come up and it just gets tricky. So that's my sermon to say, don't write it unless you absolutely have to. And it's your last ditch effort. You're in the hospital and you got 5 minutes to live. Sure, write it. Otherwise, it is worth the investment to hire an attorney to get it done and make sure your intent, your wishes are carried out. And I think a lot of times it can prevent a lot of strife in families as well if you have a good plan in place. Okay, so it has to be in your writing, and then this is where you're going to name your executor, sometimes referred to as your personal representative. This is the person who's going to be in charge of your estate. You want to make sure you name the right people for this. I've seen a lot around here that everyone wants to name somebody out of tradition. I'm going to name the eldest son as the executor. Well, if eldest son has been in rehab 3 times, and maybe your daughter, who's a licensed CPA, who's never done a wrong thing in her life and works at a tax firm, maybe she's the person to name, not Johnny, who's been in rehab 3 times. So let's name the right people, not out of any kind of tradition or like, well, it's going to hurt his feelings. Well, it's too big of a job to worry about feelings because they're going to be dealing with somebody like me in the court and judges for the next year, getting things done. So you want to make sure it's somebody who's diligent, who's going to take care of business, and also someone who works well with the heirs and other family members. And again, maybe Johnny and Susie don't get along. Name a third party. Name a bank. Name attorney. Name somebody else who can be the referee between all of them. So again, you want to make sure you name the right people, and then also the right people for your family as well. Of course, this is where you name your beneficiaries. So you're going to say who gets what. Maybe it's in equal shares to the kids and through the line of descent if they predecease. Or you're going to give it all to Susie because you loved her more, right? So again, you can name what they get, how they get it, and what increments and terms, and you can get as crazy as you want to in your how your beneficiaries receive your assets. It's also if you are if you have any minors, this is where you could name who you want to be guardian. So if you have children or grandchildren or something that you're the legal guardian for, you can name who you want to be in that role for them. And the last two here are things that most people don't realize, is that a will is great because it gives instruction, but it does have to be probated to be effective, which means it has to be submitted to the court. And I hear that all the time. Well, I have a last will and testament, and Johnny and Susie love each other, and they get along, and we spend every holiday together. There are no problems. We don't have to go to probate. That's not the case. If you leave an asset in your individual name, meaning there's no trust, no payable on death, no joint owner, then it's going to go through probate. It's going to go through a court-approved process to get it to your beneficiaries. So a will is great because you sign it and you put it in a drawer or a safe, dry place until it's needed. But the instructions in that will not be carried out. And Johnny can take that will to the bank and say, see, I'm the executor. And the bank is going to go, I don't know who you are and I don't care, until they get something from the court that says they can turn the asset over to your appointed executor. Number 7 is, most people say, well, why would this matter? So it's only good 5 years from the date of death. And I've seen this come up more than I ever thought I would after learning this rule in law school. But there was an estate plan not too long after I joined the foundation. I was looking through files, learning as a young attorney does, and found an estate plan, and I saw the date of death. I was like, oh, in a couple weeks, that's the 5-year rule. I should look this up. And so I looked it up, and I was like, why do we have the original will still here? And as it all turned out, long story short, the family didn't know that will existed, and there was a 6-figure gift to one of our ministries. Well, needless to say, that never happened because that money was long gone, and it would cost more money to get that money back at that point. So that's a short sermon to say, make sure your loved ones and your heirs know where your documents are, because if they can't find them or don't know they exist, they may not happen. Because if you get past that 5-year mark, then your will is void. And I have this situation going on with the family right now. They're trying to get things filed quickly because the 5-year, they've dragged their feet on everything. And the will says it goes to the first child and the second child, and the third and fourth are left out for various reasons. I think good reasons. But anyway, so first and second child are wanting to get that will submitted pretty quickly. But if they don't quit dragging their heels, that will is going to be null and void here pretty soon. So all that to say, you want to make sure that they know where it's at and it's going to get submitted so that your wishes and your intent take place if you have it in a last will and testament. Okay, yes, ma'am.
I may be jumping ahead because you may address this in a trust.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to provide for a disabled child,
Mm-hmm.
is the will the instrument for that, or is because they're going to have to care for the life?
Yeah, for those that couldn't hear, and maybe the two people streaming this, if that haven't tuned me out yet, she asked about, is a will a place to provide for maybe a special needs or incapacitated minor or something like that. You can put that in the will. You can have like a special needs trust inside of a will. You can have that's called a testamentary trust that would come out of the will. But what I usually tell people when they're contemplating that, or if they're needing that, is to go ahead and create a trust from the beginning, so that because in order to enact that trust inside of that will, it has to be submitted to probate. So if you have to if you can avoid probate and you need a trust anyway, I tell people set a trust up from the beginning, and I'll talk more about that here in a second. Yes, sir.
Just clarification, and I misunderstood, I think, initially, that's why I'm asking this question. When you say only good for 5 years from date of death, you mean post-death, right? Not like a look-back rule. Once you do a will, it's a good will.
Right. So if I died today, then it would be 5 years from now that my will would become void. So yeah, it's 5 years from the date of death of the decedent, the person who created the will. So it's not a look back. Yeah. Okay. Now we're going to move on to trust. Okay. So a revocable or living trust, there are a million different types of trust, but I'm just going to talk about the ones that most people use these days, which is a revocable or living trust, which is basically like a will in that you name who you want to administer the trust, you name your beneficiaries and all that, but it does all of those same things outside of court supervision. So when it comes to estate planning, this is my favorite. So even though I'm a licensed attorney, I hate dealing with the court just as much as anybody else, and I don't want to go there. I want to do things outside of court supervision. I don't want anybody telling me when I can do things and have to file a petition every time I want to make a move with the estate. So that, I feel like that should be everyone's default. And most people think they have to be like Donald Trump or something to have billions of dollars to have a trust. But really, if you have 2 kids, a house, and a bank account, I say get a trust, because it may be like taking a bazooka to a knife fight, but the bazooka wins the knife fight every single time. I think, unless it's like close, anyway, we're not going to get into that. Okay, so, all right, next slide. So with revocable trusts, there are 3 parties, and this is what, some of this makes it confusing, because every legal document has different legal terminology for the parties to that document. And so it can get confusing. But with a trust, there are 3 parties. There's the grantor, trustor, or settlor. If it ends in OR, that means you're the creator of the trust. That's the person's creating it. Then there's the trustee. That is the person who's like the executor of the trust. Most attorneys would try to hang me for saying that, but that's, at the end of the day, that's what it is. That's the person who's going to administer the trust. And you'd say a lot of people don't even think, they don't understand trust because they don't know what it is. And so what I try to tell people is think of a trust as like a bucket. And you got to get things in there now or payable on death so that it comes into the bucket at some point. And the trustee only controls what's in that bucket. So if you have something in your individual name, so for example, you have a deed and it says John and Susie Smith are the owners of this piece of real estate. Well, that's in your individual name. That's going to go through probate. But if it says the John and Susie Smith Living Trust is the owner, well, it's in the bucket. So that asset will pass outside of court supervision. So the things that are in the bucket are the only things that the trustee control. They do not control anything outside of the bucket. Okay, then there's the third party, which are the beneficiaries. And so while you're living, you're all 3 parties most of the time. So you're the person who created it, you're the person who controls it, and you're the lifetime beneficiary. Because a lot of times people say, well, I don't want to lose control. I feel like I'm going to lose control if I create a trust. Well, you're the end-all, be-all of the trust when you create it, because you're all 3 parties. There's no one who can tell you what to do. So at the end of the day, all that changes is the legal ownership of your bank account. So you still sign your checks the same. You still go to the ATM. You still, buy a Lamborghini if you want to. But on the signature card at the bank, it just says the Smith Living Trust is the owner. And here are the authorized signers on behalf of that trust, which are John and Susie Smith. So, again, nothing is changing on a day-to-day basis, practical basis. It's still your asset. You're still in control of it because it's in the bucket, and you're the trustee who controls the bucket. So, again, you're not losing control. And like I mentioned, there's a million different types of trust, but kind of the 2 main ones we're going to talk about, the living trust or revocable trust. That's the one you can change during your lifetime, or the testamentary trust, which is kind of what I mentioned here a second ago, which is a trust that springs into being at your death. Yes, sir.
Yes, I have 2 questions. One is, like, I have a bank account, and I have my name and my goddaughter's name on it. So if something happens to me, that shouldn't be a problem. Also, on my house, I got the forms of says, when I die, it will go to her. Now, will that have to go to probate?
So the two questions is one, if you have a joint owner on your bank account, as a joint owner, when you pass away, will it automatically pass to them? And then part two of that was, if you have a beneficiary deed that says at my passing it goes to them, do those have to go through probate? The answer is no. But so that works when you point. It can work. Let me say it can work if you have a joint owner on your account. But as the estate planning attorney, that's not my favorite because of liability issues. So goddaughter is probably perfectly fine, and this is all never going to happen. But as the attorney, I'm always looking for the boogeyman, right? And so with liability issues, it's, okay, so what happens if she gets in a car wreck and she gets sued, and then they go looking for assets? Well, that may have to be claimed as one of her assets. Or what happens if she's, I don't know, trying to get qualified for Medicaid, and they're looking for assets? Well, say you have access to this money, you don't qualify. Or what happens if you're going through she goes through bankruptcy, or she goes through a divorce? They say they're looking for assets. That's her asset. She has access to it. So for liability reasons, I would prefer it that it would be just in your name, and she be listed as a power of attorney. If you want her to be able to sign for you now, execute a power of attorney that says she can sign for me now as my agent and transact on this account, and then also make it payable on death to her. And so that way it achieves the same thing, but doesn't subject your assets to any kind of legal liability. And then part two is the beneficiary deed. So as long as you sign that and it says this piece of real estate goes to her, and it's filed in the county where the property is located or situated, then that's legally valid. And you can file as many of those as you want to, and the last one wins. So if you change your mind, you can always file another one. And you can also revoke it, too, if family member, you don't want to give it to them anymore. So there's a lot of options with beneficiary deeds, which I like. I meant to say this earlier. Another reason why I like it, a beneficiary deed and keeping it in your individual name and then using a beneficiary deed. I think it was 2 years ago now, our legislature passed that DHS cannot do estate recovery on a beneficiary deed anymore, meaning that if you have to go to Medicaid long-term care, a lot of times the DHS can do estate recovery and recoup some of their costs. Well, now it says if you have a beneficiary deed filed, it goes to that beneficiary and they cannot go back after it. So it's a great way to do a little bit of asset protection planning without having a full-blown irrevocable trust and all the other expensive items to make that happen. Okay. Yes, sir.
Is there a difference between the trust and the beneficiary deed for tax purposes? But if it just goes, are they gonna have to pay taxes on a beneficiary deed as compared to, I didn't think they had to in a trust.
Yeah, so the question is there any tax benefit to putting in a trust versus a beneficiary deed? And the answer is no. As long as the property is transferring to your beneficiaries because of a death, under the current code, there's no taxes. So what happens is any asset that has any kind of appreciated value, real estate, stocks, those sort of things, if they pass because of a death, they get a step up in basis. So you bought the house for $200,000. Well, because of the last 4 years, it's now worth $400,000. So what happens is on the date of death, it gets a step up in basis to that $400,000. That's the basis that they received that asset at. And so they sell it with no capital gain. Now, if there's a big change in value from the time of the date of death to when it's, and when they sell it, so I don't know, it goes up another $50,000 from the date of death to when they sell it, they could potentially be subject to capital gain, but there's no like transfer taxes or estate taxes because of that.
I've been the beneficiary on that. That's the way my parents did their last
Yeah.
home. And it was wonderful.
Yeah.
Because they had done pretty much exactly what you said to do.
Yeah, so it's a great thing, and a lot of times, kind of going back to the example of joint ownership, if you put their name on it now during your lifetime, or give it to them during your lifetime, they inherit your basis. So they inherit that $200,000 basis. So when they sell it at $450,000, they're going to pay a capital gain of $250,000. Well, they're going to be taxed on the potential capital gain there. So that's why my preference is that they receive it at death and not during your lifetime, because of the tax benefit that's currently in effect. Okay, why do we want to trust? The biggest reason is to avoid probate. And again, a lot of people, they know they want to avoid probate like the plague, but they don't really know what it is. So probate, all it is the court-approved transfer of assets. So again, you have a house, you leave it in your individual name, and it's usually at the second death. So if you have a husband and wife on the deed, a lot of times, sorry men, we die first. Surviving spouse, the widow owns it, and they'll give me a call and they'll say, well, he passed away, what do I do? I was like, well, your house was owned jointly, there's nothing you have to do at this point. Your accounts were jointly, there's nothing you have to do right now. And so they think I was just blowing smoke about probate, and all the boogeyman was going to get them, and it doesn't happen, but it's really because of everything was jointly held as husband and wife. But it's really at the second death where probate usually comes into play. And so at that second death, that's when that house that's left in the individual name, to get it to your heirs or to your beneficiaries, is going to have to go through that court-approved transfer, which is filing a bunch of paperwork over the next probably year to get it transferred to the kids. So that's what number 2 is talking about. It's costly and it's time-consuming. So it's costly because generally attorneys who do probate, we're going to charge what is called the statutory fee, which means the fee is actually written in the statutes and says how much I can charge against your estate. Lucky for me, bad for you, it's pretty generous. So because some of my colleagues wrote the statutes, I think. And it says, okay, this is how much a state attorney can charge against the estate, and it's a percentage. And it comes out, rough numbers, if it's $1 million estate, and most people say, well, I don't have $1 million. Well, most of us don't have $1 million in cash, but if you add up the house, the retirement accounts, the life insurance, all those things, it's pretty easy to get to $1 million these days. And I was just using a nice round number of one I can remember that I calculated not too long ago. For $1 million, roughly, it's over $20,000 that I can charge against the estate. If it's, say it's $200,000, I think it's a little over, somewhere between $4,000 and $5,000, and that's just if it's one account or one asset. It doesn't matter if it's 10,000 accounts or it's one account for $101,000. And it's the easiest thing to transfer. I still get to charge that amount. So again, we can avoid that. You can ask for a contracted rate, but from what I've seen, most attorneys, they know what they're doing, and they know about how much they'll be able to get out of an estate, and so it's probably going to be pretty much on par with the statutory fee. But sometimes you can get a better deal that way, or you can try to negotiate a little bit. And that comes out of the estate. That's generally, it doesn't have to be paid out of pocket. You can pay it out of pocket, but the attorney can charge it against the estate. So it's not necessarily something that you're having to cough up in the beginning. It's also time consuming because Arkansas has a 6-month creditor period. So, you're going through the funeral, the grieving process, all those things, hiring an attorney, and really you're waiting on the death certificates. That's the key to unlock a lot of things. You're waiting on the death certificates, you finally get all the attorney to draft everything and get it submitted to the court, and then you're having to submit things back and forth, and finally you get the letters testamentary, and the 6 months doesn't start until a notice gets put in the newspaper. And so it's 6 months from the first time that notice runs in the newspaper before you can make any distributions. And that whole time you're having to ask permission to do everything from the court. And the fastest I've ever done in a probate is 8 months. And that was just everything lined up perfectly with, the tax returns, and everybody got along, and it was easy peasy. So 8 months is the quickest, but I've had them, the longest one I've had was roughly 3 years. And no one was fighting. It was just a complicated situation. And anyway, so it can be a bit of a time drain. And also, you're subject to the court and the judges. Sorry if anybody's a judge in here, or if I have a case before any of you. But you're subject to when the judge wants to sign off on things. There's one probate case I had in I'm not going to say counties or anything like that, but let's just say a more rural county. I filed everything, and all the judge had to do was sign off on the order. I sent it down, waited a few weeks. I called and said, hey, what's going on? They said, oh, it's on the judge's desk. I said, okay, great. Well, let me know if there's something I can do to move this thing along. Well, about 2 months later, I finally said, this is ridiculous. Because looking back on the filing, I was the 14th case that year in that county, and it was near the end of the year. So in my opinion, they didn't have a lot going on, so they should have easily been able to sign off on that 2-page order that I needed. So I called the preacher because the estate was going to the church, or part of it, a good chunk of it. And so I called the preacher and said, hey, do you know Judge so-and-so? And he goes, yeah, he's a member here. And I said, oh, well, you mind giving him a call this morning and telling him about this estate? And there's a document on his desk that really needs his review. And magically, I had the order back the next day. So, again, the only thing I can come up with is they have a lot of power. The only thing I can come up with, which is true, is that, and this is true, it happens, that county judge and office, I was the big city attorney coming in, and I didn't have a relationship with the judge, and that was my first and last case I've ever had in that rural county since then. But that's the only thing I can come up with, and that happens quite a bit. And it is still can be who you know in a lot of situations. And unfortunately, if you get outside of some of the bigger cities, it's still the Wild West. I mean, judges and the clerks, they just do whatever they want to. I've been practicing almost 11 years now, and I'll get something in some rural county, and they'll reject something, and they'll be like, well, you didn't do this. And I'm like, well, what's that? And they say, well, that's how we do it here. And I was like, that's not the law. That you just came up with something. And they're like, well, no, that's how we do it. And so used to, when I first started, I would argue until I was blue in the face of the law. And then I realized there's the law and there's getting things done. And so now I get things done and only argue the law if I absolutely have to. And sometimes I have to get things done. But again, it's the Wild West. They can do whatever they want to. So again, that's all to say. It's very time consuming. And really, it can all be avoided. And again, I think it's an investment. I'm not just trying to prop up my livelihood. It is well worth the time and effort to an expense to get an estate plan. Okay, so number 3, it's private. So if someone's going through probate or any court case, really, it's a public matter. So because it's the 21st century, I can go online and see everything. I can see how much the estate was worth, how much everything got liquidated for, who's fighting over what, and everything that's going on. But with a trust, it's private. Nobody's privy to that information except the parties to that document. And so no one's going to know. Your nosy neighbor is not going to know everything that was in your estate, how much you had and how much you're worth and all that. So again, the trust is private. It's another benefit there. It's also a great way to control distributions to minor children. I talked about it earlier. A lot of people want to leave gifts to their grandchildren, and that's perfectly fine. But the issue is anyone under 18 cannot inherit directly. So if you leave something to your grandchildren who are under 18, they're going to have to get a guardianship appointed just to get it to the kids. So if you want to do that, set up a trust, and that way the trustee can control the distributions to the kids. And usually it says something like, it can be given to the legal guardian of that child. So again, it's going to go to a custodial account through your children to your grandchildren. So it's a much better way of getting it to the minor children. But it's also, 5, it's a great way to control distributions, maybe to your adult children who still act like minors. And you want to give them just an income or a certain amount at certain time intervals. Like, they get a certain amount at 30 and 35 and 40, because Johnny, he's been in rehab 3 times, or maybe he spends most of his vacations in Vegas. You think, well, I don't really just want to drop a whole lump sum on him. Maybe we're going to control this distribution, or even put in some requirements he has to accomplish before he can get a distribution. You can do that inside of a trust, and really the only way to do that is through a trust. So if you put that in a will, again, it's going to have to be submitted to the court before it can be implemented. So might as well set up a trust from the beginning. And again, you can do the same thing for ministry. You can do the same thing for your church, or any nonprofit you have a heart for. But you can insert those kind of things into your trust and into your will, and provide for mission trips in the church, or scholarships so kids in the church can go to Ouachita or Williams, or go to seminary, or whatever it may be. It's a great way to do those same kind of controlled distributions inside of a trust. Okay, so I'm going to move on to incapacity. So has anybody got questions about wills, trusts, or anything we've talked about so far before we move? Yes, ma'am. Price of a trust. Okay, so that's a good question. So price of a trust, from what I can tell, it's gone up, just like everything else with inflation. But generally, and most of the normal price range is somewhere between $1,500 and $2,000 to set that up. Some are still in the $1,200 range, but from what I can tell, the bigger the firm, the bigger the price a lot of times. And I'm not saying that they don't do good work. I'm just saying a lot of times I've seen astronomical prices from attorneys, meaning,
I have another question.
yeah.
Hypothetically, say I was to give my estate to this church.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, do you prepare that free since you're working for the Baptist, or do I have to go outside and get it?
Yeah, so she asked if she gives her estate to the church, do I prepare that? So I can. So like I was talking about earlier, so I can prepare the drafts free of charge. It says whatever percentage, or 100%, whatever you want to put in there, goes to the church. And we recommend you take it to outside counsel at that point, because the state of Arkansas says there's a conflict of interest in that I'm an attorney employed by the foundation, and I prepared an estate plan that gives back to a Baptist entity. And I've seen a few court cases in which they believe there's a big Baptist conspiracy going on, even though we just have good stewards in the church. So all that to say, to protect your estate plan, we recommend getting someone to look over it with you. And they may charge, from what I've seen, a lot of times they will just charge their hourly rate to review it. Now, you don't have to. You absolutely don't have to have outside counsel. You can execute it on your own, but we at least recommend it to try to keep your plan in place. Yes, ma'am. I can prepare all the documents for you. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Define a living will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so she said define a living will. I'm going to hit that here in a second, which is, well, actually, we're there. Yeah. Any other questions about trust, wills, probate? Yes, sir. It'll come back to you, sir. Yeah.
A will can be challenged in court. Can a trust be challenged in court?
So he asks, a will can be challenged in court. Can a trust be challenged? What I tell people is that anybody can sue for anything, and they try to, but it doesn't mean they're going to win. So they have to have standing to be able to sue, maybe a beneficiary, a kid, or something like that. But a lot of times, wills and trusts both, you put a no contest clause in there that says, okay, you can challenge this in court, and if you do, you get nothing. At least that's what I put in my trust. So it's a great way to calm down the beneficiaries. Now, can they still try to? Obviously, they can. They can try to challenge and say you were incapacitated or there was some kind of undue influence or something like that. But I think there's a lot of ways to head off a lot of those things. And with trust, you're creating them, and then you're moving all your assets around, and you're actively, participating in your estate plan when you do all that. And so I think it takes out some of the question of whether or not you have the capacity to do some of those things because you're signing off on all of it. But then I'll just go ahead and hit this now too. So the biggest thing, if you are going to leave something to, if you have an estate plan that's outside of the normal, and so what I mean by outside of the normal, so if it doesn't say in equal shares to your kids, or maybe you're going to leave 10% to the church, or maybe you're leaving 100% to the church, I don't know. One of those things, I would say you document everything, just like I would as an attorney, doing all this stuff, because you want to communicate with your family members and your loved ones your plan, because I've come up with a formula over this last decade. It's money plus grief plus unmet expectations. And when all those three things exist, there's going to be a challenge usually, or someone's going to cause a stink. I can't remove the money because there's usually something there, and hopefully there's grief because they're sad that you're gone. But again, I can't control that. But the third one is unmet expectations, and we can all control that. So if you have the family meeting and set them, and don't do it with Johnny because he's your favorite, put Johnny and Susie and whoever else in the room and communicate your plan. They may not like it, but they heard it from the horse's mouth. And sorry, I wasn't calling everybody a horse. But you've communicated it, and a lot of times, especially with charitable estate plans, I tell people to write out a personal and spiritual testimony. One, again, part of this whole created legacy thing is, again, we're talking about stewardship. What I do with our people that I work with, I get them to write out their story. So it's their personal kind of just life story, and then their spiritual testimony, what Christ has done in their life. And then part of that is why they wanted to leave a certain amount to the church or to the children's home or, whatever it may be, so that it's communicated and they can see that's, really what you wanted. And the other part of that is I'm always kind of working in two worlds because I'm trying to make people be good stewards and promote biblical stewardship, but I'm also having to do all this legal stuff as well. And so one of those things, when you do that, you're creating what's called a contemporaneous writing, which captures your intent when you create your plan. And so I always tell people, write that to your kids and your family members, give it to your pastor, give it to anybody who will take it, so that way they know exactly what you wanted. And two, I think it's a really cool thing to do because, they say basically after 2 or 3 generations, no one remembers anything. And so I think it's a great way to kind of document, the family lineage and that legacy part of estate planning. So that was a long answer to your question. I apologize. Any other questions? All right, there'll be more. Okay, so planning for incapacity. So this is something I think is really important because there was a study that came out a few years ago that said because of advances in healthcare and longevity, that 70% of us are going to be legally incapacitated at some point. But that other study said that only 30% of us think it's going to happen to us. So there's this disconnect. And unfortunately, I've seen this far too many times where something needs to take place and it's too late. And I've had to turn a lot of people away or tell kids, I'm very sorry, but I don't think that your parent needs to be signing anything at this point because I think they were legally incapacitated, and any document could be called into question based on their behavior and diagnoses that were in their file. So all that to say, don't wait until it's too late. Again, I know we're all going to live forever, and all of our family members have lived to be 100, and there's no dementia in the family. Well, we don't know. We're not promised tomorrow, and there's nothing we can do to prevent that. So have a plan in place before it's too late. So here are some of the documents that are absolutely needed and recommended for basically everybody. So the first one is a durable power of attorney. Sometimes it's referred to as a financial power of attorney. This is someone who can, you are the principal in that document, and you're naming an agent who can act on your behalf. And I can see that it's already 7:06 based on that clock back there, so I'm going to speed up, and I apologize.
Good eyes, brother.
Yeah. Well, I was telling somebody earlier, I can see now. I had LASIK last year, and so I'm like a hawk right now, for now. But so I'm going to try to speed up, and I apologize, but I'll stay around for questions as well. So you're the principal, naming an agent who can transact on your behalf. This can be immediate. So for the situation where you want somebody to be able to sign on your account just in case, you can execute an immediate power of attorney and go ahead and put them on your bank account. Or it can be a power of attorney that says, it's only upon my incapacity that they can act for me. So that's called a springing power of attorney. And so you can have it where basically they can't act for you now, but in case something does happen, there's somebody there in the wings who can sign for you. And with those, you can always sign something. It's called a certification of authorization, which again is another nonsense phrase, but what it means is I want this person to be able to act for me now. So even if you have a springing power of attorney, you fast forward, you're 99, you say, yeah, I need a little extra help. Then you can sign one of those documents, and then they can go ahead and start acting for you. And then there's the healthcare documents. So there's the healthcare power of attorney. This is the agent who can make healthcare decisions for you, and they can also access insurance and medical records. So that's another agent that's I think is it's needed for sure. The other healthcare directive or document is called a living will, and it gets kind of confusing because you have a living trust and a last will and testament and a living will, but the living will or Arkansas Declaration, which most people which the question was earlier, basically that's a document that says, okay, if I get in an incapacitated situation, here's the intervening treatment that I would want in that scenario. And you can get real complicated with that, but the form that I usually start with, there's two answers, which is whether or not you want artificial hydration and nutrition. So IV fluids, feeding tube, that sort of thing. You can get really complicated with it, but at the end of the day, you want to make sure you communicate your wishes to your healthcare power of attorney because they're the ones who are going to carry out your wishes. Your living will just says, this is what I would want in that situation, and they're only going to listen to the healthcare power of attorney if you have one. So you want to make sure whoever you name in that situation, they're going to be able to carry out your decisions, and then also that they're going to be available. Arkansas also, I'll skip to number 4, but Arkansas also has what's called the POST form. At least that's what we refer to it as because it's an acronym for the act that created it. It's the Physician Ordered Life Sustaining Treatment Act. And basically that is a document that you fill out in conjunction with your treating physician or your PCP. And it covers some of those things in a living will. But it also has that do not resuscitate order on there. A lot of people say a living will, they refer to it as a DNR or do not resuscitate. Well, a living will is not that because a do not resuscitate order is a medical order that has to be signed off on by a doctor, a licensed medical professional. And so that POST form, you can Google that, Arkansas POST form, and it'll take you to the Department of Health's website, and it'll have that form there. And so from what my understanding from talking with palliative care doctors, that document should be only executed when you get that terminal prognosis. So if you're 21, don't fill out a POST form. Or if you're in perfect health, really don't fill that out. It's really when you get the stage 4 pancreatic cancer, they tell you got, 3 months. That's when you fill out that form. But that is available. It's free. It's on the Department of Health's website if you need that. Okay, we're going to go to the next one unless somebody has questions. I get a lot of questions about taxes. We kind of hit a little bit of that. But these are the two main ones. So everybody talks about the estate tax, or sometimes refer to the death tax or the transfer tax. That is really a non-issue these days, at least until end of 2025, because you only are subject to the federal estate tax if you can see the number there, if your estate is over $13.61 million. And that's per person. So a couple can pass over $27 million without having an estate tax problem. If you have that problem, please come talk to me afterwards. We got some planning to do. But I'm going to assume, like the 99.9% of people in the United States, you don't have this problem. And the people that do have this problem have usually planned around it. So again, it is a non-issue for most people. And Arkansas doesn't have an estate tax or a transfer tax. So again, that's not going to be an issue. In 2026, it's allegedly going to go down to roughly $6 million, unless if they do away with what we refer to as the Trump bumps from the last few years. But that's only if Congress changes their mind, and they never do that, right? So right now they're projecting $6 million if you pass away in 2026. And again, that's per person. So if you have roughly $6 million or $12 million as a couple, again, come talk to me afterwards. Another one that people don't realize is about the gift tax. And that was also part of that discussion earlier. When we put our family member's name on our assets, like a deed or a bank account, it could be deemed a gift. Or if we're giving more than $18,000 per year to them, it's the giver owes the tax, not the recipient. So you may be subject to the tax if you're giving more than that. And so if you're going to give a piece of real estate during your lifetime for one reason or another, sometimes people are doing like Medicaid asset protection planning, which is one situation where I might say it's okay to give it during your lifetime, then you may have to file a gift tax return to avoid that potential tax. So again, talk with your tax preparer if you're giving things away in excess of that. Okay. Okay, this is the last slide, I promise. So just as a reminder, retirement accounts these days, there's a few rules that went into place because of the Secure Act, which the short end of it is basically if you're not the spouse or one of the other few exceptions, then you got 10 years to close out that account. So if you give your retirement account directly to your kid, then they have 10 years to draw it out. It used to be over the life expectancy of the beneficiary. So if I inherited it as a 37-year-old, I would have to take out a certain amount based on the life expectancy of a 37-year-old. But now they say, we don't care, you got 10 years. Spouse can roll it over to their name just like they used to. There are some exceptions for minors, and those are on disability or beneficiaries who are within 10 years of the account owner. But most people fall into the 10-year rule. So that's just a reminder. If statistics are showing that retirement accounts are some of the largest assets in the United States right now. So if that's going to cause an adverse tax situation or maybe some additional planning needs to take place, it's something to consider with your retirement account. And then I think right now you don't have to take out your required minimum distribution until you turn 73. So, and that's probably going to keep going up. And I'm sure Uncle Sam is going to come out with new ways to tax our retirement accounts because they want their tax dollars. So that's why the 10-year rule came into place anyway. Okay, I'm going to stop because that was probably a lot or too much.